On 15 February 2013, NASA had the media focused on the flyby of asteroid 2012 DA-14. After weeks of hype, the flyby turned out to be a non-event. Although they say a bad day fishing is still a good day after all, it was still a bad day for NASA because the agency was blindsided by the biggest rock to hit the planet in over a century. The Chelyabinsk meteor that airbursted over the southern Urals released the equivalent energy of over 20 Hiroshima bombs. It damaged over 7,000 buildings and 500 people had to seek medical treatment for wounds. Well, dumb luck that for NASA, because it all turned into a curious minds want-to-know media circus. And all they could do was to stumble from one geeky explanation to another until they found the right one. Pray. And praying might not be such a bad idea after all. Since 1911, the American Meteor Society, AMS, has been tracking visual meteor observations, and beginning in 2005, an upward trend in the number of reports can be seen. In 2010, the AMS reporting system was simplified, and its reporting procedures had a marginal increase in the number of reports being received. Nonetheless, the explosive growth in meteor sightings between 2011 and the present cannot be explained away as a reporting fluke. Bill, on our Two Suns team, has calculated the final total for 2013 based on year-to-date figures. Overall, an unquestionably disturbing trend is here, and it begs the question, what out there is throwing all these rocks? And if you live in Canada, this is not the only sign to be concerned about. This year, communities around the Great Lakes have begun to see a whole new kind of traffic sign popping up. They're called EDRs, which stands for Emergency Detour Route, and here is the kicker. All of them are directing traffic away from the Great Lakes. Yes, it's unsettling, but look at it this way, Canadians. You get road signs. In America, Homeland Security is buying enough small arms ammunition to reenact World War II. So count your blessings. Hello, I'm Marshall Masters, publisher of Yowza.com, YOWUSA.com. And for those of you who have been following our work for years, this is the video you have been waiting for, because we're going to show you images of two objects in the Planet X system, the core and one of the outermost orbitals. But first, let's go to the topic of December 21, 2012. First off, December 21, 2012 was a spectacular media event by the cable channels. People couldn't get enough, and this was great for advertising sales. However, now that we've had a non-event, folks are beginning to ask a fundamental question about how the date was calculated, and they're making a good case for December 16, 2013. In response to these fundamental questions, Discovery Channel tells us that a carbon dating of a structural beam from a Guatemalan temple confirms that the Mayan long count calendar did end on December 21, 2012, leaving no room for further doomsday prophecies and miscalculations. But 2 paragraphs later, they say the days are counted from a mythological starting point. So in essence, Discovery is saying that they've carbon dated a mythological starting point. Ergo, we have nothing to worry about from this time forward, because for the first time in history, someone has used carbon dating to fix a calendar date. Oh, really? Or is this just the Discovery Channel using a bit of good old-fashioned spin to give itself a pass, like a coyote with feathers in his mouth telling the farmer, "What, me? I didn't eat no chickens." That being said, the whole dating issue of 2012 has always been a thorny issue. And so I really took notice when the 00 Skyview team published their latest update in which they say the correct date is December 16, 2013. And they do raise a big question. Was this done to throw the public off? And if I have to choose between Discovery Channel carbon dating a calendar, which is a dubious explanation at best, or the Skyview team, it's clear to me that the only purpose for carbon dating a calendar is to protect your humongous advertising revenues. So, yo Skyview, we're with you guys. So then, what's the real meaning of December 21, 2012, aside from advertising revenues? Debating the reasons for this date, frankly, are moot. What matters is that with the exception of a hermit living in a cave in the Ozarks who is still waiting for Richard Nixon to be impeached, everyone else knew about this date and what it meant. It meant awareness about the right to choose, an international day for people to stop, look, and to contemplate the world about them and what that portends for our future. Consequently, none can weep about not being given the opportunity to choose. And say what you may about the cable channels, we believe they're entitled to their advertising profits because they did a bang-up job of creating awareness. And prior to December 21, 2012, awareness was the mission. So now, mission accomplished. Where does this leave us? Given that folks have had their awareness opportunity of choice and plenty of time to make it, it's mission accomplished for awareness. Now we have a new mission. The mission is transition. What do I mean by that? Well, for those of you who are seekers of truth, we're looking at a slow motion train wreck over the next few years. And our goal is to help you transition through that, to get through the difficult times of moving into a post-historic world following a global cataclysm. This period of transition is not going to happen in an instant. Rather, it will be like an escalator ride to hard times, one where each step is but part of a larger unbroken string of failures, each bringing us closer to a final collapse of most of our belief systems and institutions, those that shape our lives. Most will be mangled or perish before reaching bottom, but those who are prepared for this long-term transition from life as we presently know it to a post-historic world will make it to the end of the process on their own 2 feet, ready to press on in the reality of a new world. I call that new world the backside, a future date when humanity sees blue skies once again. It's why I always end all of my podcasts and videos the same way. I say, I'll catch you on the backside, when skies are blue again. And when I do that, who am I really talking to? In my mind, I'm talking to you seekers of truth. You're the core constituency of Planet X research. You're the ones who have had dreams, visions, and premonitions, whether it's tsunamis or asteroid impacts, whatever it is, something has just grabbed you and made you take a look at things until eventually one day, wow, the blinders come off your head. And when that happens, you know you're never going to see the world exactly the same way ever again. It happened to me about 15 years ago. And I'll tell you, after that happens, you will ask yourself, will there ever come a day when I no longer miss the bliss of ignorance I once enjoyed? I can tell you, I still miss the bliss. But somewhere along the way, you'll stop asking yourself that question. And the day that happens is the day you finally feel that you have a good beat on things, that you know where you're going with it. So yes, you'll always miss the bliss. That's just the way it is. It comes with the turf. And the turf now is no longer awareness. The mission is transition. No more date-driven outcomes. It is about the process of moving from the present to the post-historic. That's why our new mission statement is, surviving the worst of times begins with surviving the best of times. A soft landing, if you will, from whatever ends life as we know it. For old hands, it means a new time to improve upon what you have and to fill in the gaps. And for newbies, it's a chance to do it right the first time with like-minded others you know and can trust. The driving wisdom of this new mission of transition is not something that we've seen happen recently, but rather it goes back thousands of years to ancient societies and civilizations that have survived global cataclysms, and they have passed their knowledge down to us. And what they tell us is that you have to go through a period of transition from one reality to the next. And we're going to talk a lot about that later on in this program. But right now, what I want to jump into is the object of interest we have been tracking in Costa Rica at the Turrialba volcano. In early January of this year, we began reporting our observations of an object seen from the Turrialba volcano in Costa Rica. I dubbed it Bluebonnet, and since then we've amassed an archive of hundreds of images captured from the Vulcan camera feed overlooking the western rim of the volcano. However, on May 22nd, the Turrialba volcano erupted with a 4-kilometer high ash cloud, and on May 29, the Vulcan feed went out of service. According to Ovascori, the operators of the feed, a lightning strike disabled the camera, and they worked to fix it. And on July 11th, the feed resumed with what appears to be a new camera with lower resolution. Local sources tell us that this new camera was gifted to them by the United States government. And what we're seeing right now, frankly, is no longer really useful for our work. But time will tell if it is a cover-up. But for now, we have images to show you that Bluebonnet is in fact not a reflection. I would like to take a moment to say thank you to all of the folks on the Planet X Town Hall that have been so helpful in getting this research done. Most particularly, the Two Suns in the Sky research team, Barbara and Bill. You guys are really wonderful, and I couldn't do it without you. I really do appreciate it. And I want to have time for a special call out to a gentleman by the name of Jorge Urena, and you're going to see a lot more of him later on in this program. In my last update video, Blue Kachina and its moon, published on April 20th, 2013, we reported that we asked the Volcano Files group at Cambridge University if they could help us with a boots-on-the-ground observation the next time their team visited the Turrialba volcano in Costa Rica. The response we received from Kayla Lacovino of volcanofiles.com reads in part, "I had a quick look at your website. Given that neither the volcanic plume of Turrialba nor clouds in the summit obscure the white dot you are tracking, I think it's safe to say that the white dot is in front of, rather than behind, the volcano. Considering that the Vulcan feed has been down since May 29, and what has come up is not usable, the reflection theory of Cambridge was a big win for deception." A plausible coincidence, you might say. After we posted our last video, Jorge Arena, a stringer, posted a series of images on the Planet X Town Hall. I think they're really good, and as a matter of fact, Jorge even went the extra mile to circle Bluebonnet in this sunset series, which clearly shows our object of interest sinking behind the clouds, not in front of them, as Cambridge tells us. So let's take another close look and you can see for yourself. When I first laid eyes on this, I said to myself, now that's an ace up my sleeve, or as lawyers like to say, a briefcase surprise. Why? Because since we started this project in January, we've always known something would happen to close the feed and make it unusable. And so happens it did, just when the Vulcan feed was really starting to get interesting. We knew Cambridge was wrong from the get-go, that they were just doing another knee-jerk debunking. And the reason why is, early into the process, I developed a methodology for examining objects near the sun. I call camera sensor illumination, or in other words, CSI. Now, this is just not an arcane study technique. For those of you who are living along the coastlines in particular, this could be the one thing that saves your life, because it can give you a 24-hour head start advantage. We first introduced our CSI method in our article, Object of Interest as Seen from the Turrialba Volcano, Update Number 1. We used it to show that Bluebonnet is a real object and not a reflection. What I'm going to show you now are the final results of that initial effort. Our perception of images is still rooted in the early days of film cameras, when we first visualized a finished picture hanging on the wall and then used a camera to capture that. Today, film or digital makes no difference. It's how we still take our pictures today. We begin by seeing them on the wall. However, the key to understanding the revealing power of CSI is not to see the world as the one taking a photograph, but rather to see the world as the camera itself, as an electronic light-gathering device made to harvest photons of light through a lens and then using digital circuitry to transform these photos into millions of pixels of manageable data. But how is all that organized? To answer that question, let's use a picture of one wall of our new red brick house. Once we capture this image with our digital camera, we can then transmit a full resolution copy of it to any place in the world in just minutes. But how is that high resolution digital image constructed by the camera? Well, it's the same way humans have always made brick walls, one brick at a time. And the bricks in a digital camera are arrays of sensors. And just like the colored bricks in our brick wall, no two are exactly the same. This is because each sensor is exposed independently of the others. Therein lies the secret of the camera sensor illumination CSI analysis method. As we've seen with the Vulcan feed at the Turrialba volcano, they can become useless for our purposes pretty quick, especially when our government is gifting new cameras to people. But we're not bereft of hope here. We have cell phones, high-definition smartphones, and prosumer, rangefinder, and DSLR digital cameras. To get an idea of how these three different cameras perform, let's see how the three construct a digital wall. Cell phones are, well, better than nothing, but not by much. Now, that's because the low resolution of these tiny cameras doesn't leave you a lot to work with. With high-definition smartphones, the resolution is considerably better, but the fixed exposure priority mode of these cameras floods the sensor array with light, and it then has to use shutter speed to control the exposure. Consequently, while HD smartphones may have the same exact resolution as a prosumer digital camera, the digital camera still has the edge. That's because today's prosumer digital camera typically has much more resolution than an HD smartphone, plus significantly better lenses and more balanced exposure modes. The result is that a camera costing just a few $100s becomes a powerful observation tool. So then, how do we use these new tools? Earlier in the program, we saw how NASA was completely blindsided by the Chelyabinsk meteor. It was the biggest rock to hit the planet in over a century, and NASA was hard-pressed to explain why it had been blindsided. But one of their explanations does go to the challenge we face. They said that they missed the meteor because it came out of the sun. The point here is that we are looking at objects near the sun from our point of view and far behind it. Plus, the Vulcan feed is situated in a high-altitude, ever-moving, soupy atmosphere with high humidity, vapor, smoke, passing clouds meters thick, and cloud banks that are kilometers thick. All this moisture was affecting our viewing abilities, and while trying to research that, I happened upon a 2005 National Geographic article titled "Global Warming Supercharged by Water Vapor." It was an interesting article, and it got me to thinking, could there be some new kind of advantage here? Consider this. We tend to think of water as being transparent, but in fact, the water in our atmosphere is translucent from the viewpoint of a digital camera. This is because the only way to have really transparent water is to make it in a laboratory. But in nature, the water in our atmosphere is translucent, like the rain falling on our windshields. We must wipe it away to see clearly. This image analysis technique is called camera sensor illumination, because what we're really looking for are objects that are bright enough to punch through the water, if you will, in our atmosphere to reach the camera lens. To help illustrate the concept, let's use this night video of a group of scuba divers. Here we see their flashlights through the water column. So let's take a quick snapshot for an analysis. And to do that, let's select an area left of center for our image. The first step in any CSI analysis starts with gamma. Gamma correction controls the overall brightness of an image. And gamma correction was specifically created for digital desktop publishing, and it is a very powerful tool. So the best way to use gamma for CSI analysis is by reducing it. Here we see a gamma step down of the bright object to the left of the screen. So what are we looking for in this object? What we're looking for is foreground illumination. But what causes it? What causes foreground illumination is that the object is hot enough to light up the atmosphere between it and the camera lens. And so we not only see the object, but we'll see the atmosphere between the object and the camera. In other words, we're looking to see if our object can backlight the water in our atmosphere. And when it does, we then see an illuminated foreground surrounding the object itself. To help illustrate the point, Let's look at the flashlight off to the right of the screen. When we step down the gamma, we see minimal foreground illumination with the blue-green halo surrounding the object. Also, and this is key, even a minimally illuminated object will still feature crisp details. So what we have here is a natural hot object pointed away from the camera lens. Given that, is there a cold object? And if so, what? Well, yes. We call them reflections, refractions, center of focus ghosts, sundogs, etc., etc., etc. In terms of camera sensor illumination studies, a cold object does not push photons at the camera lens. Rather, cold objects are cold and fuzzy, and they manipulate the light of other sources. Hence the term cold object. Now let's take a look at two examples of camera sensor illumination analysis. One in which it really doesn't apply, and the second where it is a perfect fit. On June 21, an IntelliHub.com post titled "A Spherical Object the Size of Jupiter Discovered Next to the Sun" and imaged by HelioViewer June 17-18th has caused quite a stir. Even the aliens from Andromeda have piled on with their take about all of this, and we've gotten a lot of questions about it as well. So let's take a good look at it all. First off, I want to emphasize the number one rule of Planet X research. The closer something gets to the truth, the faster it disappears. It's why those of us who do the research really just do not pay much heed to government websites. We'll find things that we can use from time to time, but other than that, we know that all you're going to do is run down one fruitless rabbit hole after another. But yet, people still keep persisting in this hope that they're going to get the straight answers. Well, everybody has to do what they think they're going to do. And in this case, everyone's all worked up about a government source. So let's take a look at this government source. In this case, it is NASA's stereo solar observatories, stereo A for ahead and stereo B for behind. At the time of this observation in the IntelliHub.com article, both are behind the sun and aimed at it. Consequently, stereo B's field of view extends from the sun to an area of space that's over our right shoulder, so to speak. And stereo A is looking the other way. So both are looking at the sun and whatever is behind us to our left and to our right. However, our research on the Vulcan feed and the other images we're showing in this video are of objects that are near to and behind our sun from our field of view. Consequently, the Jupiter-sized image the IntelliHub.com poster is seeing is not behind the sun. Likewise, the same can be said of the possible orbitals associated with this Jupiter-sized object. So with that, let's take a hard look at the image itself, and let's select this area to the lower left for our study. The first thing we see is that there is no evidence of camera sensor foreground illumination because there is no atmosphere in space. So CSI is not useful for analyzing these kinds of images. Instead, we need to use a more traditional approach of studying the object itself, regardless whether it is hot or cold. When we do, the first thing we see is that the object does not have a normal, uniform daylight side facing the sun, a clear terminator, and a dark night side. What we are actually seeing is the kind of banding we see after someone shoots a BB gun at the windshield of a car, which in space can be easily explained as a micrometeorite impact on the camera. Plus, the field of view from stereo B is always changing as these two satellites are in counter-rotating orbits around our sun. However, Tony Smith on our town hall did a historical search for images in this lower left quadrant next to the sun and found this object in that area when Stereo B's field of view was different from that of June this year. So what is it? Who knows? But here's what our analyst Bill found. The first thing he noticed when examining the available imagery in the IntelliHub article is that the object appears in a matter of seconds. This is highly unusual, to say the least, for what some would call a Jupiter-sized object. But of equal concern is that this solar observatory also has 6 other cameras, all pointed in the same direction, and this Jupiter-sized object does not appear in any of them with the same date and time. So, what would NASA say if they were willing to opine on this Jupiter-sized object? They'd be just as likely to debunk it as a coronal cavity case closed. This is why our approach is very different. On the Two Suns research team, our motto is believe nothing, observe everything, and leave no stone unturned. And so when we're looking at objects and we're using camera sensor illumination, we're not only trying to determine if they're real, but we're also using CSI to determine how they move through the sky. Here we see Bluebonnet on January 15, 2013, as we first found it at the beginning of our study. And here we see it months later on May 7th. Both images were taken by the same exact camera, a high-definition surveillance camera, such as the one shown in this example. If you'll note, both images were taken during the same time of day, only seconds apart. Also, both viewing dates had very similar atmospheric viewing conditions. So, to start our CSI analysis, we first use close-ups of Bluebonnet taken from both dates. Then we look to see how many sensors are showing full foreground illumination. And keep this in mind, we never count partial sensors, only full sensors. And this gives us a clear result. On January 15th, the object is clearly smaller and not as bright as it is on May 7th. So what is our conclusion? Bluebonnet's increased size and luminance means that it is now closing with the Earth. Nonetheless, a lot of folks are still going to call it a reflection. But for now, I want to address the core constituency, those of you who are seekers of truth, like me. As a seeker of truth, it's how I found the Colburn Bible. And it's got a lot of ancient information in it that is directly relevant to these days. And what I want to do is share a rather interesting story about it, something that came from modern times. And then I'm going to read a passage that talks to where we're at right now in the world and what we're going to see next. What we learned in our research is that after the Glastonbury Abbey was burned to the ground in 1184, the manuscripts that would later become what we know now as the Colburn Bible were secreted away by the surviving Celtic priests to an unknown location in Scotland, and there eventually put into the care of what we now know as the Hope Trust. There the manuscripts were translated into Old English, or Shakespearean English, if you will, and they remained secreted away for centuries until a few years after World War I, when the Hope Trust moved the manuscripts to London. There, they were translated into the Queen's English, or Oxford English, if you will, which is what you now find in the edition we publish. The updated manuscript remained in London well into the beginning of World War II, and despite the Nazi bombs falling on London, it was a devoutly religious housewife who actually came closest to destroying it. She discovered it while cleaning in a home and was fixing to burn it as heresy before members of the Hope Trust quickly intervened and returned it to Scotland, where it remained until it was finally revealed to the world in 1992. But what really got my attention about this story was that after thousands of years of people working so hard to protect this manuscript, it could have all been for naught thanks to a religious housewife. Go figure. But I was intrigued about this Battle of Britain story, if you will, and I dug into that and found something that really talks to us in these times. The battle for Britain was an awful time for Londoners, with bombs falling everywhere, death at any turn. And it was during this time that Londoners read Shakespeare and the classics like no other time throughout the entire 20th century. Think of it. When you're living in such perilous times, it's just hard to sink your teeth into a dime store detective or romance novel. That's why what Londoners needed was something that could talk to their circumstances of living with death hanging over your head. In the classics, they found that meaningful sense of connection to help them endure the hardships of a brutal, brutal war. When I read the Colburn Bible, I feel a very strong, a very real connection to people in the past and their hopes and visions for us in the future. And we have an account that was handed down to us by the ancient Egyptians about the last flyby, which happened to be the 10 plagues of Exodus. And this was documented following Exodus, and it tells us what we're about to see. Then men will be ill at ease in their hearts. They will seek they know not what, and uncertainty and doubt will trouble them. They will possess great riches, but be poor in spirit. Then will the heavens tremble and the earth move. Men will quake in fear, and while terror walks with them, the heralds of doom will appear. They will come softly as thieves to the tombs. Men will not know them for what they are. Men will be deceived. The hour of the destroyer is at hand. In those days, men will have the great book before them. Wisdom will be revealed. The few will be gathered for the stand. It is the hour of trial. The dauntless ones will survive. The stout-hearted will not go down to destruction. For historical note, the great book is what the Colburn was called in its first incarnation. For you seekers of truth who find themselves in a leadership or trusted advisor role, the Colburn Bible offers the survival wisdom of our ancestors, wisdom that will connect with your circumstances in a way that no other book could. With this in mind, let's turn our attention to the images of Jorge Arena, our very talented stringer at the Two Suns in the Sky research team on the Planet X Town Hall. And what I want to do with you, the viewer out there, is that we're going to do this camera sensor illumination analysis shoulder to shoulder. On May 27, 2013, Jorge was flying from Ontario to Lima, Peru on business. And fortunately for us, we have Jorge queued up and online. And so, Jorge, please introduce yourself to the audience and let them know a little bit about what brought you to Planet X.
Hello, Marshall. Yes, my name is George Urena. I am the president of Utco Corporation, a company based in Ontario, Canada. manufacturing products from Peru. I get to travel a lot, and well, definitely I came to the topic of Planet X because of a vision that I had a few years back. Doing some research on the website, I found your website.
Well, Jorge, I'm really glad that you did. And now I'd like to get into some of the details on your business flight from Ontario to Lima, Peru.
Well, Marshall, due to my business, I get to travel quite a bit, almost everywhere, and particularly to Lima, Peru, because that's where we get all our products for distribution worldwide. And in this particular case, I decided to take a special flight, not the usual way I normally do it, which is a direct flight to Peru from Toronto. This time I've done it through El Salvador via TACA Airlines. The flight departed at around 10:30 on May 27th, arriving at El Salvador around 3 o'clock. We were flying at about 37,000 feet altitude, and that's when I basically take all these pictures. I should mention, Marshall, that the pictures taken with my camera have a date stamp of Toronto, Eastern Standard Time.
Jorge, during your trip, I could see that you were doing a lot of experimenting with your Nikon camera. And it was good to see that. A lot of people just won't take the time to test their equipment that way. And in the process, you found what I believe to be an incredibly compelling image. It was a 1-second exposure taken south of the equator at an altitude of 37,000 feet. And that's quite remarkable. Jorge, what is it that you learned with this particular camera experiment?
The reason why the plane inside, the lights of the plane were off. So that created a perfect scenario for the camera to pick up on the light outside. I have difficulty trying to set the camera, put the camera to the right settings in order to take the pictures. But honestly, because there were no lights inside, I was able to capture the light outside. And that's the reason why I was successful in getting this picture.
Well, Jorge, I have to say, hats off to you for a really, really stellar 1-second exposure image. With that in mind, now I'm going to explain to you what those 3 objects are that you captured. While we see 4 possible objects, the faint one in the lower right is not a real object. However, the other 3 are. And when I used Starry Night Professional and the raw file data from your camera, I found that you actually photographed a rare conjunction of 3 planets, Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus. Jorge, given that you did not image Planet X in this particular photo, let me ask you, was the effort worth it?
I think it was really worth it.
Now, that's the spirit, Jorge. You know, on our team, our motto is, believe nothing, observe everything, and leave no stone unturned. And we did that with your images and found something rather surprising. This image you took below the equator not only shows a rare conjunction of Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus, but one that is consistent with the many stories we found about this conjunction event on popular astronomy websites. In other words, Jorge, this image is irrefutable proof that you took it at that time and at that altitude over the Pacific Ocean. And so it was this image that put us on the path to an amazing discovery in one of the earlier images you captured during this same flight. Before we share that with the viewers, Jorge, I'd like for you to explain to them what you learned about taking pictures through the clouds at high altitude.
Well, this is very interesting, Marshall, because eventually I found that the clouds act as a filter, as a natural filter in order to control reflections.
Thanks for sharing that, Jorge, because you really hit the ball out of the park. Not below the equator, but rather 4 degrees above it, and at an altitude of 37,000 feet. So let's take a close look at where Starry Night Professional places Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus. Keep that conjunction in mind, because in this image we find Jupiter and Venus exactly where Starry Night says they're supposed to be, but no Mercury. Then again, it's not the brightest bulb on the tree, so to speak. But what is that bright dot near the sun? Let's take a closer look at that. And yes, there is something there close to the sun, and it is not where Mercury is supposed to be. So, are we experiencing a technical fluke? Necessary question. With that in mind, I went back and double-checked my settings, and they were fine. And so, yes, we've got Jupiter and Venus pretty well nailed down, but we're still drawing a blank on that mystery spot near the sun. Okay, now it's time to do a camera sensor analysis, CSI, and we'll start with the 2 objects we're certain of, Jupiter and Venus. As we see, there's plenty of natural foreground illumination for both. So, it's 2 thumbs up for Jorge. With this in mind, let's return to our mystery object. In this sensor analysis, we see a clear outline of Mercury, and for the record, no way would I have ever expected to be able to see this in any HD smartphone or cell phone image. It's just too subtle. But what I can say is, thank you Nikon, thank you Nikon, thank you Nikon. This is the difference 16 megapixels and a good lens can make. And it doesn't cost an arm and a leg. And there we go. Mercury just where Starry Night told us it would be. So now, that's 3 thumbs up for Jorge, because we've nailed Mercury as well. But there is still 1 stone unturned, the mystery object near the sun. So let's go for broke and do a camera sensor illumination analysis. And once again, I must say thank you Nikon, because I never expected to see anything this close to the sun that could generate anywhere near this amount of foreground illumination. At this point, we know that we have a hot object, but what gets me is a hot object this close to the sun with this much foreground illumination. What am I really looking at? Well, getting the answer to that is pretty straightforward. It's what I call a gamma step-down test. The step-down begins with a default gamma value of 1.0. There you methodically step it down to see how hot your objects really are. And we see that while Venus is hotter than Jupiter, it too falls by the wayside. But our mystery object just keeps going on, all the way down to 0 gamma. Only 2 things can punch through with clear definition and the same bluish halos: our sun and its smaller companion, the Planet X system brown dwarf. This raises Jorge's score to 4 thumbs up. But wait, there's more. This is also the first recorded visible light observation of our sun's binary twin by a non-governmental observer. So, Jorge, what do you think of all this?
Well, Marshall, definitely I'm impressed on what I've seen. I was not really prepared to get something like this. At least I was willing to get something, but I think I got really something that I was not prepared to see.
You know, Jorge, neither was I, but it was really a stroke of luck, if you will, that you just happened to take that business flight on the day that there was a triple conjunction that was so well documented. So, with all of that in mind, do you have any last words for the viewers out there?
Well, definitely, Marshall. People should start looking at the skies and be prepared for what's coming.
Ditto that, Jorge, and once again, I want to thank you for a job well done. And now we're going to move on to the distance analysis, and you folks are going to see that there is some good news, and, well, there's some very bad news as well. Over the last few months, I've received a steady stream of emails from people who are disappointed with how all of the Planet X predictions have been playing out so far. And it's important for us to address that, and we are going to address that in detail. But right now, what we need to do to set the stage for that explanation is to make an approximate determination of how far the core of the Planet X system is from our sun. When we look at two suns in the sky images, it's easy for those who are not sky watchers to assume that the horizon on Earth is the same as the ecliptic, or if you will, the sun's horizon as seen from space. This is not so. Because the Earth is tilted on its axis, the ecliptic, or the sun's horizon as seen from space, is actually at a sharp angle from the horizon we see on Earth. The point here is that if we want to determine its true distance from the sun, we have to do it from a view from the ecliptic. The ecliptic, as far as we're concerned, is the tail that wags the dog. So with that in mind, let's revisit Jorge's image. Here we see Jorge's image taken 4 degrees above the Earth's equator at an altitude of 37,000 feet. And here we see Jupiter, Venus, and the Planet X system brown dwarf relative to the horizon as seen through Jorge's passenger window. However, Jorge's views through the passenger window is not the correct view of the ecliptic from space. And this is the view we must use to determine the actual location of the Planet X system. So we must begin this analysis by rotating Jorge's image to the correct perspective for the ecliptic as seen from space. Now, to actually determine where these objects are relative to the ecliptic, we rotate the image thusly, and the dotted line we now see is the ecliptic. So, we have Venus above the ecliptic in the northern skies, above the sun's equator. Below the sun's equator, in the southern skies, we see Jupiter to the left. And to the right, near the sun's 7 o'clock position, we see the Planet X system brown dwarf. So on May 27, 2013, what we see is that both Jupiter and the Planet X system brown dwarf were both below the ecliptic. This is excellent for our study because it allows us to do an apples-to-apples comparison, if you will. Here we see a close-up of Jupiter, and here we see the Planet X system brown dwarf. So let's study them side by side. And what we see is that while the Planet X system brown dwarf is considerably brighter than Jupiter, Jupiter is about half again larger, if not twice as large. With this in mind, let's look at the basic differences in size between a planet like Jupiter and a brown dwarf sun. And what's interesting to note is that there are a lot of people that view Jupiter as somewhat of a near sun, if you will. This notion of Jupiter as a near sun was explored in the movie 2010, in which Jupiter does become a second sun. And it's within reason because Jupiter actually gives off more energy in the form of heat than it does receive from the sun. Consequently, the movie closes with an image of two suns in the sky, our own sun to the left, and the new Jupiter sun, which is now a smaller one, to the right. So let's compare the size of Jupiter with that of a brown dwarf. What we see is that they're not far apart, and a brown dwarf can be twice as large as Jupiter, if not bigger. With this in mind, let's revisit our close-up of Jorge's image. Here we see that Jupiter is roughly twice as large as the brown dwarf. Using this size difference as a guideline, let's see what the approximate distance is between the Sun and our Planet X system brown dwarf. The best measurement for this purpose is what astronomers call astronomical units, AU for short, where 1 AU is the average distance between the Earth and the Sun. While Earth is 1 AU, Jupiter is 5.2 AU, and Saturn is 9.52 AU. And then way out there is Neptune at 30.08 AU. So when we use a simple formula where the image size of our brown dwarf is approximately half that of Jupiter, we can roughly place its current location at 2 Jupiter distances from the Sun, beyond the orbit of Saturn, if not further. Which means that Jorge imaged this second sun in our image at a time when it was a few degrees south of the ecliptic and well beyond the orbit of Saturn. That's the good news. Why is it good news? Is that now we have more time to prepare. For those of you who are not prepared, this is your second opportunity to do it right the first time. And for those of you who have prepared, this is also an excellent opportunity for you to review your plans and see what you can strengthen and where you need to fill the gaps. Now, this is something I've been doing personally myself, and one area of planning and preparation that seems to be a real thorn is survival health care. And we've got a lot of solutions, but it's really not well organized and somewhat spotty. We can do those simple things like making sure we have baking soda on hand to raise our pH. That gives us greater immunity. But again, it's rather spotty, and this is why I found Danjon breathing. This really goes back to 2011 when I was interviewing Master Roar Shepherd. He's a Danjon breathing instructor. We got to be good friends, and he invited me to a class he was giving in Berkeley, and I decided to try it out because I was having a real problem with irritable bowel syndrome at the time. And my preferred method of treating it then was with Chinese acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicines, which were, well, giving me results, but not the greatest results. So there was nothing to lose. I went to attend the class. What surprised me was that I was the only newbie there. Everyone else was coming from another discipline, yoga, Reiki, Tai Chi, and all of these are wonderful practices. I love them all. They're all good. But why were they going to learn about Danjon breathing if they were already doing something else? Well, what they explained to me was that Danjon breathing has a very pure view of breathing itself, which is integral to everything. You can't do yoga without doing breathing, for example. But in yoga, when you're doing the breathing, it's only increasing your body's oxygen levels to about 103%, where tests have shown with Danjon breathing, it goes up to 107%. So what does that 4% difference buy you? Well, it increases the immune system. And when you look at the history of this ancient art, you understand why. This was developed back in the early days of acupuncture by Korean elites, the powerful and wealthy. Now, these people were not particularly worried about dying of starvation or exposure like the peasants were. They had to deal with wars and assassinations, but what they were really terrified of, despite all of their wealth and all of their power, was to catch a cold. You ever heard the expression, catch your death of cold? Well, that came for a reason, because people used to catch colds and die. Well, what the elites were doing was they were focusing on something that would not only give them all of the other general health benefits of other practices, but what they wanted in particular was to boost their immune systems. Now, this is really relevant to those of you who are in planning and preparation. I want you to think about this. If you have a flu and you're running a temperature of 103, and you're having to walk out for 10 miles with a group of folks, are they just going to sit down and wait for a few days while you get over your fever and you get over your flu and you can walk again? Or are they just going to say, catch up with us when you can? Think about that. And what if you're in a bunker and you catch a cold? Next thing you know, you're sneezing, all kinds of foulness all over the place. You really think you're going to win a popularity contest that way? Not likely. So these were the problems that the elites had thousands of years ago in Korea that you're going to have in the future, in a post-historic world, because we're not going to have hospitals stocked with all kinds of wonderful drugs and antibiotics. We're pretty much going to be on our own. Yes, doctors, nurses, health caregivers, they're all going to be doing what they do, but they're going to have to do it for 10 times as many people and with 10 times as less the resources. And so that means your emphasis has to be on prevention. Now, there's an old movie from years back, and there was a character in this movie. His name was Curly, and he was going, that one thing. Remember that film? That one thing? It was from City Slickers. Well, when it comes to healthcare survival planning, the wisdom that I found was from these ancient elites, which is your number one concern, above all else, is to boost your immune system so that you're less likely to contract a communicable disease, and if you do, you're going to recover from it much more quickly and with less issues. And this is the whole point of Danjun breathing. If you're doing it 20 minutes a day, all you need is a little bit of room wherever you're at, and you can just make it happen. And remember, our motto is surviving the worst of times begins with surviving the best of times. Danjun breathing was designed to survive the worst of times, so you can only imagine the many benefits that you're going to enjoy today. And there are quite a few. So please, if you are enjoying the information that we're giving to you in this program, do yourself a favor. Go visit Cut to the Chase at my website, yowza.com, and listen to my podcast with Master Roar Shepherd, because we're talking to you directly as preppers. But also visit our website at feelbetteronyourown.com, and there we have some free demonstration videos that'll help you to understand it better and to experience it for yourself, because this system will help you. I am the courseware architect of Danjun Breathing for Wellness, and I designed it based on my experiences as a young man as a medic in the Army. As a medic, I had an aid bag, and I knew what was in that aid bag and what I could do with it and what I couldn't. Now, it wasn't a panacea, but I knew I could do the important things, and I knew I could find things fast. And when I designed this course as the architect, that was exactly what I had in mind. Because if I could make it useful for you as a prepper, for everyone else, it would be the tool of the century for health and wellness. So with that, let's go ahead and move forward to the next part of our program, which is going to be the orbital path analysis. This orbital analysis that you're going to see is not the result of a one-man job. Rather, this is the result of a dedicated team of volunteers on the Planet X Town Hall who put a lot of time and a lot of energy and, yes, a lot of love into the work. And one of them found something that was incredibly important for us. Earlier this year, Planet X Town Hall member Peter, who is from Belgium and goes by the screen name Shofar34U, found some 23 different videos posted on YouTube in 2010 by a gentleman by the name of Rodolfo Quesada. What they show is Bluebonnet, not with the high-definition surveillance camera we began monitoring it with in January, but with the one it replaced, the older standard definition camera. Also, as the field of view is tighter, Bluebonnet will look bigger with the older standard definition video. Thanks to Rodolfo's efforts, along with those of our Planet X Town Hall membership, we now have the basis of a 2-year orbital plot analysis for the Planet X system. Here is an April 19, 2010 feed capture by Rodolfo. And here is our April 16, 2013 feed capture. Now let's view them relative to the sun as seen from the ecliptic. So will they be above in the northern skies or below in the southern skies? Well, our Starry Night plots indicate that we found Bluebonnet at the sun's 5 o'clock position in 2010. Then in 2013 we see it further out and at the sun's 4 o'clock. So now that we have approximate plots for Bluebonnet, let's shift our attention to the other side of the sun. Now you're going to see where Jorge found the Planet X system brown dwarf. First, in the northern skies above the ecliptic, we find Venus. Then below the ecliptic, we find Jupiter to the left of Venus. And then there, near the sun, we see approximately where Jorge's Planet X system brown dwarf was found. So, now let's take a look at the whole picture. Here we have the Two Suns in the Sky research team observation of Bluebonnet on April 16, 2013. And to the left, what we see is Jorge's May 27, 2013 image of the Planet X system brown dwarf. However, without a third observation point for either object, there is no way to develop even the most rudimentary orbit. However, it is our great fortune that Rodolfo Quesada was inspired to capture the 2010 Vulcan feed and publish it on YouTube. This is because we now have our third observation point, and we can use it to extrapolate the approximate location of the Planet X system brown dwarf on April 19, 2010. And from there, we plot its path. And the first thing we see is that it is going to slip behind and remain behind the sun in conjunction for quite some time. And as this goes along, Bluebonnet will eventually become more visible, which is what we're already seeing. Well, that we were all able to see before this new third camera was installed. But in time, Bluebonnet will become visible for all of us. And shortly after that, the brown dwarf will reach its point of perihelion, where it will be closest to the sun in its orbit. Once our second smaller sun reaches its point of perihelion around Old Sol, that's when things are going to get pretty grim. We call it the kill zone. Hopefully, the brown dwarf will become visible before it reaches perihelion, because this is where it begins to arc back through the ecliptic and into the southern skies. It's this perihelion to ecliptic region we call the kill zone, because the interactions between the two suns at this time will result in solar storms of biblical proportion. In a very real sense, when we see this happening, we'll know that dying time is near. Earlier in the program, I told you about all the folks that have been writing emails to me about the Planet X predictions, which are in the ballpark in most cases, but nothing spot on. And we really need to address that head on to everyone's satisfaction, and we're going to do that. And we're going to begin that by looking at one prediction that actually, in my opinion, is going to be spot on. On October 21, 2008, Project Camelot posted an interview with Planet X whistleblower Bob Dean. And I like Bob. I've had a chance to speak with him personally on the phone, and for me, he's always been a stand-up guy. And here's what he has to say in his prediction.
And some of our remote viewers have concluded that yes, it's going to happen this time. That we and it will be on the same side of the sun at the same time. And if the remote viewer, and they're getting their information from ETs, from sources within the U.S. government that tell me that yes, they are deeply concerned about it, and they're worried sick about it, and they don't know what to do about it. What could the government or anyone else tell you?
What could they tell us? Well, this might sound like it's coming right out of left field, but how about the truth? Because the real truth is this. It's Titanic rules. First class gets the boats, and steerage goes down with the ship. We're steerage. And it's this way because the last to know are usually the first to fall. But likewise, it is why the first rule of predictions is to always be mindful of them, but to never live in expectation of them. That way, you keep a balanced view of the future. As for me, predictions have always been, well, you might say, a bittersweet thing, because in 2008, I saw something, not once, but twice, that has forever changed my view of all predictions. In April 2006, Yowza.com broke the story on the South Pole Telescope, the SPT. The SPT is a powerful infrared telescope installed at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station. And in 2008, not one but two whistleblowers revealed Planet X images that had been captured with the SPT. Posting on YouTube as Nibiru Shock 2012 and DNIR 4808N, both accounts immediately came under vicious attack. Nibiru Shock 2012's channel was hijacked by disinformation operatives, who used it to smear him in the hopes that he would eventually step forward to reclaim his account and thereby reveal his identity. He did not. Good for you, Nibiru Shock. That was the smart thing to do. The next was DNIR 4808N, and this was a targeted takedown. It happened within hours of his disclosure video going live. With YouTube, you're usually allowed one mistake, and it takes a few days for that to catch up with you. But not only was his video pulled within just a few hours, his account was likewise terminated as well. Something that comes down this hard and this fast can only happen if there is a government response. So when people ask me the question, when will I see Planet X? It's always odd for me because I've been seeing it since 2008. And that's what I tell people. But it tends to go in one ear and straight out the other. And why? Because what people really expect is the spectacular. And actually there are some rather spectacular things to witness these days. That is for those who are willing to look. And what is getting our attention most these days is what we call weather weirding, which actually feels more like weather worsening. Then there are the volcanoes. As in, the captain asks that you remain in your seat while we taxi back to the terminal. And doesn't it seem par for the course these days that when an earthquake happens, it must produce a 3-figure death toll if it's to make the front page, and 4 figures to get above the fold? Sinkholes are hard for disinformationalists and spinmeisters to easily dismiss. This is because there is not much of a case for natural variability, as in what's natural about the Earth sucking you, your home, and your auto down into the bowels of the Earth. And what about these heat waves? On the downside, the last decade has been the hottest on record, ever. On the upside, fossil fuels are helping to melt the polar ice, which in turn is opening up whole new fields to explore for oil in the north. Ergo, a great way to use local oil to melt local ice so that everyone else on the planet melts in the summers. The point here is that predictions are a tool and nothing more. Hoping they come to pass is like hoping your house will burn down so you can file an insurance claim. That being said, what about the predictions in my own books, Planet X Forecast and Crossing the Cusp? While both were well within the ballpark, neither were spot on. In our books, Planet X Forecast and 2012 Survival Guide and Crossing the Cusp, we presented possible flyby scenarios. The goal was not to make hard predictions, but rather to provide a compelling reason to understand the celestial mechanics involved. But for the sake of argument, we'll call them predictions. So where did they go wrong? First off, according to the ancient Egyptians, nobody has seen the Planet X system since its last flyby, which was the 10 plagues of Exodus. So we formulated our scenarios, or predictions if you wish, using references to known objects, such as comets. However, it was not until we could do a rudimentary orbital path analysis did it become obvious as to why these scenarios were not spot on. Here we see it took 3 years for the Planet X system to enter our outer system, and it is still beyond Saturn. By and large, comets are faster. Also, the ascent from the southern skies up towards the northern skies is more shallow than we had first imagined. Or simply put, the universe has thrown us the mother of all curveballs. I'll be the first to admit that the predictions from the past were in the ballpark, but not spot on. No Cupid doll. But that being said, these predictions are no longer prophetic. Rather, they are academic. And what we're seeing right now is going to be, well, a slow motion train wreck that's going to take many years. At a bare minimum, 3, perhaps as long as a decade. And so the bad news is that it's going to be a slow motion train wreck. The good news is that right now we have, if you will, a narrow window of opportunity to prepare. But this gift of time is like a candle burning at both ends. It burns twice as bright and twice as fast. So in a moment, I'm going to share with you what I believe to be the first global cataclysm that we're going to see. Because frankly, from my point of view, it's already in progress. And with that in mind, I want to take a moment now to share with you some thoughts about our books, Planet X Forecast and Crossing the Cusp, and how they can help you to prepare for the years ahead. Both Planet X Forecast and 2012 Survival Guide and Crossing the Cusp, Surviving the Edgar Cayce Pole Shift, are what the titles say they are about: surviving. Both offer scenarios or predictions, if you will, to help illustrate the celestial mechanics. But The predictions are a very small part of each book. Nonetheless, the focus is with survival in these books and in everything else that I do. For you newbies, Planet X Forecast and 2012 Survival Guide is the ideal starting point for those of you who are just getting into planning and preparation. This book offers 2 principal survival strategies and is intended for those on a modest budget. Here are some of the key features. Most will want to prepare to survive in place, such as a home or bunker, and with this strategy, you get started with confidence. However, you also need to be able to survive on the move, and what you wear, eat, and carry will have a direct impact on your survival. And here's the good news. You may already have many of the things you need lying about the house. For me, the biggest gem in this book is the section on how to build a kill zone solar radiation shelter using a wide variety of inexpensive and readily available materials. This is because solar storms will cause the greatest loss of life. Once you feel you have a good bead on your own survival planning and preparation, you're ready to step it up to a whole new level. And that is where you want Crossing the Cusp, Surviving the Edgar Cayce Pole Shift. While Edgar Cayce's dating on his pole shift prediction was off, everything else he said is falling into place. And that means we'll face something the ancient Egyptians called the Great Winnowing, or what Christians might refer to as the meek shall inherit the earth. And by the way, they will, and in this book you'll learn why, and it will surprise you. Where Planet X Forecast focuses on family survival, Crossing the Cusp focuses on self-organizing communities, because getting through it with like-minded others you know and can trust will greatly increase your odds of survival. And the biggest gem in Crossing the Cusp for me is the last chapter. It describes how humanity can use present-day technology combined with human spirituality to mitigate the effects of the flyby with something I call an intention vortex. Folks, this really doesn't have to be as bad as it can be. You know, we bandy about the term global catastrophe, but the fact is, what do we really experience? It's more of local and regional catastrophes, at most perhaps a national, which means that it typically is happening to someone else, somewhere else, in some other time. But what about a global catastrophe, some kind of event that is so powerful, so huge, that it impacts all life on the planet? What would that look like? In particular, what would be the first kind of global catastrophe event? Given present warming trends, the most likely candidate for the first global catastrophe will be methane releases. While methane releases by humans have actually been trending slightly downwards, natural releases of methane are trending upwards, and at a substantial rate. So, there are 2 types of releases we need to keep our eyes on. First is what is called Arctic methane release. This methane is locked up in the permafrost, which is now beginning to melt. The other release source we need to watch for are offshore gas hydrate releases. So, how much methane are we really talking about here? Well, just looking at methane gas from hydrates as compared with oil, natural gas, and coal, the conclusion is simple. There is a lot of it. And as the oceans warm, we'll begin to see numerous reports of gas hydrate releases and no doubt Arctic methane releases as well. This will be bad news because as a greenhouse warming gas, 1 pound of methane is equal to 21 pounds of carbon. And should these releases eventually reach a tipping point where a positive feedback loop happens, the process will then become irreversible. So governments can do all the chemtrail spraying they want, but once we cross that threshold, it's going to get really bad. And aren't we already seeing bad? Not since Exodus have humans seen this much algae in the water, and incredible fish kills that carpet entire harbors, plus the increasing number of droughts and heat waves. The result is all you can grow in dry dirt is dry dirt and nothing else, which means then will come the food riots as basic food prices soar. But in the end, we'll just be burying the dead. And that is why transition is the mission, because surviving the worst of times begins with surviving the best of times. And now for you newbies out there who are just getting into this and trying to wrap your heads around it, I want to offer you a safety briefing, because you really do need it. And for you old salty dogs out there that have been there, done it, and seen it, please feel free to sit in. And in closing this program, I want to now offer a safety briefing for you newbies. You folks out there that are just now trying to wrap your heads around all of this. I know that you're getting a real urge to go out and, well, spread the word, to tell other people about this, to save as many lives as you can. Now, before December 21, 2012, when the mission was awareness, that was the right, proper, and noble thing to do. But now, transition is the mission. So, don't do it. Because if you go out to tell people about this information and you don't know what their intentions are, you could just wind up burying your own loved ones as a result. It's why I say discretion is the better bullet. What does that mean? Well, as preppers, everyone says, fine, I'll get guns and I'll get ammunition and I'm ready to defend my home and take a stand. You don't want to do that. The best way to deal with confrontation is to be elsewhere when it happens. And you start doing that today with discretion. You go to the office and you get the urge to tell everybody at the office about Planet X. Fine. You're going to get a lot of them that are going to mock you, ridicule you, say, oh, one of those. Remember, they are still clinging to the bliss of their ignorance, and they're going to do it like jealous lovers. And so the blowback is going to be considerable for you. But worse yet, you're going to be telling people about your intentions without knowing their intentions. So let's say that the big event happens. You survive along with your family, and some of the people you told and who mocked you survive as well. You're going to do much better than they are. And they could find themselves in the clutches of some very violent people. And what are they going to do? Rat you out. I know a prepper. They got a house full of goodies. I'll take you to them. Next thing you know, you've got marauders showing up to do you, your family, take whatever they want, and then leave you for dead. You can fight them off, but eventually you're going to have to bury somebody. You'll run out of bullets, so to speak. That's why discretion is the better bullet. Think about that the next time you feel the urge to be a good Samaritan. Now, the next thing I want you to remember is that there's only one truth that matters. It's the truth that resonates within you, because you, and you alone, put it there, right there. And when you do that, you have a knowing. You know what you know. Nobody can shake that from you. As to the rest, believe nothing, observe everything, and leave no stone unturned. Do these things, and you will greatly increase your odds of surviving in a post-historic world after a cataclysm. And one final thought. Earlier in the program, we talked about Titanic rules. that being the first to fall are usually the last to know. Well, as of this moment in time, right now, as I'm looking at you, and as you are looking at me, you are no longer the last to know. So please, use it. And I'll leave it on that note. So until the next time we meet, remember Marshall's motto: destiny comes to those who listen and fate finds the rest. So learn what you can learn, do what you can do, and never give up hope. This is Marshall, and I'll catch you on the backside.